So today's passage is a psalm based on a season of David's life when he had to flee from his own son, Absalom, who overthrew David in a secret and violent coup. The event is recorded in detail in 2 Samuel chapter 15. In summary, Absalom spent years sowing doubt into the people's minds about David's reign, while also gaining enough trust from the people of Israel to lead a rebellion against King David. When the revolt started, David had no choice but to flee Jerusalem with whoever remained faithful to him. Absalom, David's own son, had betrayed him. David went weeping and barefoot, his head covered in sorrow. And as he fled, David was loudly and openly cursed by someone called Shimei, a Benjamite who had remained loyal to the previous king, Saul. He shouted at David, get out, you man of blood, you scoundrel. The Lord has repaid you for all the blood you shed in the household of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. The Lord has handed the kingdom over to your son Absalom. You have come to ruin because you are a man of blood. Now, David had experienced fleeing for his life before, when King Saul wanted to kill him. However, fleeing from his own son, that David was going through some difficult times, is a huge understatement. He was down, but there were those that desired to kick him while he was already down. The hardships, the trials, can you imagine? Like David, we found ourselves in seasons of real trouble and distress. Sometimes, very suddenly, we're faced with problems. Health complications, loved ones in need, financial difficulty, relationship deterioration, unknown futures, having to move home, etc. And it is hard to explain why God let these things happen to us. On top of that, like David, we're tormented by others around us, as well as the voices in our own heads that constantly accuse us of doing something wrong that caused the Lord to turn away from us. And we start to believe in these lies as well. All of us will experience much hardship in different forms and intensities in our lives. But the question today is whether we'd remember God's faithfulness in the midst of these seasons, just as David did. And this is what we'll be focusing on as we look at Psalm chapter 3. So, a question to start off. Do you think of God's faithfulness when you encounter trials and challenges? Is that the first thing that comes to mind when you are finding yourself in trouble? Probably not, if we're honest. No, that is not how we are programmed. Our normal reaction is not to look to the Lord for help. Rather, we look to ourselves and to others for help. We try to look for a solution in our own strength and wisdom. Looking to God's faithfulness is something we need to be trained for because it doesn't come naturally to sinners like us. We need to remember God's faithfulness when our problems seem so big, because when we do that, when we look to God when our problems are so big, when we see how enormous our God is, our problems will look so small. Looking to God and his record of faithfulness will remind us that he will surely provide for us everything that we need, directing everything that happens in and around us for our good and ultimately for his glory. No matter what season you find yourself in today, may you remember God's faithfulness in your distress and danger, to persevere, to grow, and to glorify God in your lives. Now, a few years ago, maybe some of you know about this, my mum was involved in a road traffic accident. A car had hit my mum's car from the back while she was stationary. And this caused her car to hit the car in front of her. So there were 3 cars, my mum was in the middle. She was innocent, but the driver at the front accused her of negligence. The claimant, the first car at the front, wanted £20,000 for damages, mental, physical, whatever damages he could think of, he wanted £20,000. This was the first time our family had ever been involved in a legal battle. The problem was that we didn't have enough solid evidence. There were photos, we had photos, but apparently that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to make ourselves innocent, make my mum innocent. And on top of all that, all the lawyers that we were sorting for help were so expensive. Lawyers are so expensive. We did not know how expensive lawyers were. What do you think was going on through our minds at that time? Who can we afford to hire for a legal advice that we need? What can we do without the legal advice, without the expensive people? What can we do to keep the costs down? Where can we find more evidence? What kind of evidence do we need? When's the deadline to submit all these documents that we have no idea, we don't understand what these documents are for? Are we doing the right thing? Does this man, this claimant at the front, know he's keeping a whole family from sleeping? These are the things that we were going through. Problems like these make you want to find a solution very quick. You're desperately searching and made to constantly face the problem. You get consumed by the problem. All you can see, think, and even taste is the problem. The problem becomes so big, it dominates your mind, your day, your sleep, your work, your relationships, everything. There's no peace. You're hopeless. And David was experiencing this kind of hopelessness. And we get to see how David journeyed through this season of hardship through the words written in Psalm chapter 3. Look at verses 1 to 2. He cries to the Lord, "Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? How many are saying to me, God will not deliver him?" David here is facing a battle. He's really fighting here, physically, mentally, spiritually. Many grew to be against him. Someone even shouted at him, saying, "The Lord has handed the king over to your son Absalom." That man was saying, God did this. God did this. Now, no matter how much of a mature Christian you may be, people's words will affect you. David probably entertained the thought that what this man had said was actually true. And it is a very dark place to be led to fear and believe that there is no help for you from God. He was facing thousands of enemies, and real physical enemies and enemies in his mind as well. Additionally, his identity as king, the identity he took comfort in, took pride in, depended on for purpose, was deteriorating. His value as an individual was crumbling. And it is in these moments we need to remember God's faithfulness, to truly see and fix our eyes on who God really is and who he is for my family, for my mum, was the constant source of comfort and strength for me as we fought through this year-long legal battle. And my hope is that you would find this source of security as well as you face future trials, overwhelming problems, and challenges. This was the turning point David needed during during his distress. And at the end of verse 2, there is a pause, Selah, as if David takes a deep breath before exclaiming in verse 3, "But you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts my head high." Everyone here has experienced proper English weather, right? We know when British weather is when it's in the mood, an umbrella is not going to help you. It's useless. It's not going to save you. In those days, there are many broken umbrellas hanging out from bins and streets, right? When England is in the mood, that's what happens. What's the best way to shield yourself in that kind of weather? We go into a building. It doesn't matter what direction the rain comes in, you're protected. And this is what David describes the Lord to be. The turning point for David was from focusing on the overwhelming problem, how big it was, how diverse and complicated it was, to focusing on who the Lord is. You, Lord, are a shield around me. That's who you are. That's who you are. Now, did David say these words because things changed and God started to destroy his enemies? No. Physically, nothing had happened. Nothing changed. But by God's grace, David was able to see the bigger picture. Not just the problem, the bigger picture. He didn't ignore the problems, but with God in the picture, in the bigger picture, the problems looked pathetic in comparison. David describes God as his glory, the one who lifts his head high. Now, David's glory refers to his identity, his source of pride. He's proclaiming here that his identity, his value, that was once dependent on being a good king and father, is actually now dependent on God. God is his true identity, and that is why his head is high, because his confidence is in God. Not his kingship, not his fatherhood, not what he can do, but who God is. In verse 4, he says, "I call out to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain." Now, a few verses ago, David was saying, "Many are saying to me, God will not deliver me." Verse 4 is a direct counter-reply to these lies. They say, God will not help me. No, God will answer me from his holy mountain. That is who my God is. No, I cried to the Lord for help, and he answered me. There is a fight going on in David's spirit that will not listen to claims in his mind around him that claim that God has abandoned him. I will not believe that. My God will answer me as he has in the past. That is his fighting cry here. And there's another pause after verse 4, as if to draw another deep breath. Verse 5 demonstrates David's trust in God. He says, "I lie down and I sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me." Now, when you're faced with health complications, loved ones in desperate need, when you feel helpless with financial difficulty, relationship deterioration, unknown future, you're not able to sleep there very well. All these problems cause you sleeplessness. The problem you're facing dominates your thoughts as you work, as you do the dishes, brush your teeth, get into bed to lay your head on your pillow. The problems are everywhere. It follows you everywhere. Hours pass as you lay in bed, but even if you fall asleep, you don't fall into a good, healthy sleep. You wake up feeling tired. What's on your mind when you wake up? The problem. It's waiting for you. Like an alarm, the trials and challenges you're facing. But David says he lies down and he goes to sleep. in the midst of all his life problems. Now, how does he do that? How is that possible? Because he knows that God will what? Sustain him. Take care of him. There is certainty in who God is in David's words here. David is saying, whenever I cry to the Lord, God always answers me. Whenever I go to bed, I always wake up safe. I always wake up safe. David demonstrates a remarkable display of calm and trust. This is only possible because David remembered God's faithfulness. In verses 1 to 2, David repeats, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying. However, in verse 6, David proclaims, I will not fear though tens of thousands assail me on every side. The many that he was focusing on, the many he talked about in the beginning of the psalm, are no longer a source of fear. He doesn't care about the many anymore. He's not ignoring the many, but the many are not a problem. How? Because of his trust in the Lord's faithfulness. Now, think about the challenges you're facing this season, whatever that may be. Is it a longing, a dream unfulfilled? You're still waiting and you fear it'll never come? Is it a current or future finances? Is there tension at work? Is there tension in church? Somebody that's sitting in this building. Are you concerned with your child's future? Are you concerned with your parents' future? In all these moments of distress and even danger, the solution is not to think about the problem less. That's not the solution. The solution is not to ignore it. We are instead called to step back a bit and look at the bigger picture. The bigger picture. Not focus on the problem, not ignore the problem. Step back and see the bigger picture. To see clearly how mighty our God is to save us through our trials. That is our calling as children of God. Now, what happened after Psalm chapter 3? Nothing physically happened. David stated his faith, but nothing happened. The circumstance and situation he was in, betrayed by his son, his citizens turning away from him as their king, they were the same. The problem, the cause of distress and danger remained. And as you'll experience as well, health complications do not disappear once your faith is strengthened in God. Not all the time. Most of the time, the problem is still there. Loved ones are still in need. Financial difficulties still need to be managed. Relationships still need mending, repairing. Reconciliation is needed, and unknown futures are still full of uncertainty. In these times, we need perseverance, and we receive strength to persevere from others in church. Their encouragement, cheering, and praying. It's written in Hebrews chapter 12, let us run with perseverance, the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. We are called to encourage our brothers and sisters in Christ to fix their eyes on Jesus in the midst of troubled times. Our prayers should be that they would fix their eyes on Jesus. Yes, pray for the problem, pray for solution, but pray that they would fix their eyes on Jesus. Why? Because as Paul writes in Romans chapter 8, verse 32, he who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for all, how will he not also, along with him, freely give us all things? In times of hopelessness, little to no strength, when the voices start to ask whether God really cares, whether God really loves you, we are to look at the cross. There you will see how much the Father loves you, how much the Father did for you. It is there that you were made a sure child of God by grace. See how he did not spare his own Son, Jesus, to willingly die for you while you were still sinners, to clothe you with Jesus' robe of perfect righteousness, that you may be presented unblemished, spotless, and perfect. Now, after he's done all of that, you think God will now give up on you? That after Jesus died for you, that he's now given up on you? You think his patience has diminished? Will he not arise and save you? Is he not a God who will strike all your enemies and silence the voices that torment you and tempt you to believe that God has abandoned you? No. He is a God that is faithful. He is not moved by you. He is loyal to you, and this loyalty, this faithfulness he expresses towards you, is not a reward you receive or deserve for persevering, for praying when times were tough, for going to church when you had other personal trials to manage. No. He is forever loyal, forever faithful, and mighty to save solely because of what Jesus had accomplished in his life, death, and resurrection. That is the only reason why he calls you his child. It is because of the finished work of the cross that God will be faithful to you. God is your shield surrounding you that will silence any voice of accusation, that will vindicate you from any injustice because of the perfect obedience demonstrated by Jesus on your behalf. So, church, fix your eyes on Jesus. Trust his faithfulness. Put your faith in him. Depend on him to be the shield around you, and he will never fail you. Persevere and remember God's faithfulness towards you in the distress and danger you find yourself in today.